former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So now it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Does the addition of the California leftist to the presidential ticket help or hurt Democrats desperate to remove Donald Trump from the White House? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Joe Biden bowing easily to pressure from the left to pick not just a woman, but a woman of color as his running mate, makes what appears to be his only choice under such circumstances, California Senator Kamala Harris. We will examine what this half-Jamaican, half-South Asian woman does for or to the Democrats' chances of defeating President Trump on November 3rd. We'll be joined in the analysis by LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer and Socio-Political correspondent Jeff Charles. Plus, our legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza, will discuss the audacious attempt by New York State Attorney General Leticia James to exterminate the nation's largest gun rights organization, the NRA.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, featuring a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians in the chattering class. So it was all quite predictable now, wasn't it? Joe Biden had boxed himself into a corner by declaring he would pick only a woman as his running mate, and then the corner got even smaller when it became equally clear he would bow to the additional demand that it be a woman of color. But given the likelihood that the 77-year-old presidential nominee won't be able to make it through one term, let alone two, he had to pick someone with enough experience in national politics to reassure voters that she'd be ready to step in as president at any time. And Kamala Harris was the only one in that narrow woman of color universe who fit that description. And when she went public the day after her selection, the senator and former Attorney General of California cleverly left out any of the radical positions she championed during her own badly failed presidential campaign and reminded people of her prosecutorial background as she predictably condemned President Trump.
As somebody who has presented my fair share of arguments in court, the case against Donald Trump and Mike Pence is open and shut. Just look where they've gotten us. More than 16 million out of work. Millions of kids who cannot go back to school. A crisis of poverty, of homelessness, afflicting Black, brown, and indigenous people the most.
So she predictably laid the blame for this Chinese bat virus and the resulting economic devastation at the feet of Trump, but went further in saying things were different during the good old days of Barack Obama.
6 years ago, we had a different health crisis. It was called Ebola. And we all remember that pandemic. But you know what happened then? Barack Obama and Joe Biden did their job. Only 2 people in the United States died. 2. That is what's called leadership. But compare that to the moment we find ourselves in now. When other countries are following the science, Trump pushed miracle cures he saw on Fox News.
That statement might actually boost the already soaring ratings of Fox News. They've destroyed the competitors during prime time the last few months. But you can see that one prong of the Democrats' attack is that Trump essentially has the blood of over 160,000 COVID victims on his hands. But the closest thing to a surprise in Kamala's scripted speech was trying to credit Obama for the roaring economy pre-COVID.
Trump is also the reason millions of Americans are now unemployed. He inherited the longest economic expansion in history. from Barack Obama and Joe Biden. And then, like everything else he inherited, he ran it straight into the ground.
You wonder if saying Trump ran the economy straight into the ground is a credible charge, given that we had record low unemployment across the board, including in every community of color, until we were hit by this damnable pandemic. Only the voters can ultimately make that decision. But one of the most predictable things that happens after a major announcement like this is the immediate release of both glowing ads and attack ads on the new nominee. And the Trump campaign pounced immediately.
Kamala Harris ran for president by rushing to the radical left, embracing Bernie's plan for socialized medicine, calling for trillions in new taxes, attacking Joe Biden for racist policies. Voters rejected Harris. They smartly spotted a phony. But not Joe Biden. He's not that smart. Biden calls himself a transition candidate. He is handing over the reins to Kamala while they jointly embrace the radical left. Slow Joe and phony Kamala. Perfect together.
So we'll see if the Trump nicknames stick, Slow Joe and phony Kamala. But while it's quite obvious Trump will take no prisoners in his campaign, the approach in Biden's latest ad is the opposite, softer and gauzier, using a single sad tale of a COVID victim and her daughter to convey the message that Trump doesn't care, but he and Kamala will.
We didn't even know that she had COVID till a week later in her passing. The president made a huge mistake in downplaying this virus. There was a lack of leadership, a lack of responsibility, and the lack of resources. I felt like our elderly have not been a priority for this administration, that they don't matter. And I feel like my grandmother didn't matter.
Trump, the attack dog, unmasking the swamp creatures versus warm, comfortable, and fuzzy Joe and Kamala. That's the campaign on the ground, at least for now, and I wouldn't expect it to change much. Meanwhile, there were a couple of almost unbelievable statements during the week, one of which must have made the Biden campaign cringe and makes you wonder if the nation's most powerful Democrat Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is losing it like Biden. After a shutdown of the entire world because of a virus emanating from China, and Biden already under attack for his ties to China over the years, and his son Hunter having made a bundle off his father's dealings with China when he was vice president, and the disapproval rating of China among Americans soaring to record highs, Pelosi went on CNN and said this.
The Chinese, what they said is China would prefer Joe Biden, whether they do. That's their conclusion, that they would prefer Joe Biden.
Folks, that is staggering. Staggering to admit what most insiders know, that Biden will go as soft on China as Trump went hard. That's called a gaffe, and one of almost epic Biden-like proportions, which in Washington parlance translates to accidentally telling the truth. But there was no accident in the jaw-dropping statement of Ariel Atkins of Black Lives Matter Chicago after a fake news report that a young black man had been shot by a cop in the Windy City. Gangs of criminals ransacked Chicago's famed Magnificent Mile, crashing and looting high-end stores and carting away probably millions of dollars in stolen merchandise. And here's how the head of Black Lives Matter Chicago reacted.
I don't care if somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That makes sure that that person has clothes. That's reparations. That is reparations. Anything they want to take it, because these businesses have insurance. They're going to get their money back. My people aren't getting anything.
Takes your breath away, doesn't it? But that woman, and so many like her, have now progressed from refusing to acknowledge the insanity to defending it to now justifying it. Welcome to America circa 2020. Quick break, and then we'll return to consider the question of how the blackness of Kamala Harris will play in the general election.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Is Kamala Harris authentically black? It seems on the surface a ridiculous question to ask about the Democrats' newly selected running mate for Joe Biden. After all, she is clearly a woman of color, but not a descendant of American slaves, a surprisingly crucial distinction among the woke left-wingers now holding sway over the Democratic Party, as evidenced by the selection of Senator Harris over more moderate politicians. Here to help us understand how the issue of the heritage and authenticity of Kamala Harris is likely to play with voters in the general election is our old friend, LibertyNation.com socio-political correspondent, Jeff Charles. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
Always a pleasure. Now, Jeff, it seems personality was the largest issue of Kamala's own presidential campaign. Even as she entered the race with great fanfare, she ultimately appeared unrelatable to Democratic voters who soundly rejected her. How can a thing as large as personality be fixed to make her an asset to Joe Biden?
Yeah, I mean, her personality, or I should say her lack of a personality, really cost her during the Democratic primaries. That along with other issues as well. But I think that it in some ways it may appeal to some people who maybe want somebody who's more of the safe, laid-back choice. Politics has become very tumultuous in America. So, I mean, a lot of people believe that Biden has this appeal of a return to normalcy. So her not so bombastic personality, it's possible. I'm not saying that it will, but it's possible that with some people who want more of a safe choice, it might appeal to them.
Well, I have to say, a return to normalcy might be the best sort of fundamental campaign strategy for Joe Biden to push. Whether it's normalcy or just a return to the old days of the establishment depends on the perspective. But Kamala appeared confused about her own campaign agenda, presenting as a tough-on-crime prosecutor one day and a social justice warrior the next day. And when she was pinned down on tough issues, instead of taking a stand, she often said, we need to have a conversation about it. Is it legitimate to say that that confusion may extend to her own heritage as part Jamaican and part South Asian?
It could, but I think what's really going to matter more is whether people can convince the public that she has actually used her mixed heritage for political purposes. I mean, when she was sworn in as a senator, she wasn't talking about how black she was. She was talking about how she was the first Indian American senator from her state. So there is talk in Twitter and on the airwaves about how she'll use her blackness when it's convenient for her, but when she doesn't need it, she'll hype up more of the Indian side. And to be fair, that's something that a lot of people who are mixed race have to deal with. She wasn't picked to appeal to the black community. She was picked to appeal to white liberals.
Absolutely. That's the most profound point that you could make during this whole interview. But we're going to carry on anyway, because there's other things to discuss. You know, Jeff, it's noteworthy that the one short-term success that Kamala had as a presidential candidate was actually attacking the man who just picked her as his running mate, Joe Biden, for being a de facto racist by opposing one of the most unpopular experiments in American history, forced busing back in the 1970s. Why didn't that get her more traction among black primary voters?
I think precisely for the reason that you just said. It wasn't a very popular policy to begin with. On top of that, I mean, at that point during the race, it wasn't really possible to pin a charge of racism on Joe Biden. Nobody actually believed that he was. Now, with some of the remarks that he has made since then, people can make that argument a little bit more. And we've talked about this before. I think that's going to cause a lot of black people to stay home. But realistically, that wasn't really going to take him out. And then after Tulsi Gabbard brought up something that was worse that Kamala Harris did as Attorney General, that's what knocked her out. So, I mean, I think it was an effective attack in that it elevated her a little bit, but it was never going to knock Joe Biden off.
So until Tuesday of this week, the race was Trump versus Biden. Now it's Trump versus Biden and Harris. And while VP candidates don't often make a difference, she is bound to, because given Joe Biden's decline, shall we say, few people expect that he could make it even through one term. So a lot of attention is going to be focused on this woman. So all in all, do you see Kamala strengthening or weakening the Democratic ticket?
Yeah, so that ties back into the point that I made before. Kamala Harris was not picked to appeal to Black people. I mean, the Black vote's already going to go to Joe Biden. Like I said, there'll be some that stay home, but the ones who do go to the polls are going to vote for Biden mainly. So Kamala Harris is for a key voting bloc that Trump is struggling with right now, and that's white suburban women. And I've seen that here in Texas. Like he's kind of losing a lot of them, and he's trying to do things to get them back. But Kamala Harris appeals to white liberal, especially white liberal women who really won't care about her background as far as prosecuting and locking up Black men for marijuana charges, because a lot of them like to virtue signal that they care about that stuff, but in reality, they don't care. She's more of a safe choice for them. She's more of an opportunity for them to virtue signal and say, yeah, I support Kamala Harris. She's a Black woman.
On that note, Jeff, many fine points you made. Thanks so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Jeff Charles, LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we'll consider whether and how the selection of Kamala Harris as likely the most significant running mate in modern history changes the electoral calculus.
Ready, set, go.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com, because we put the power of the press in your hands. With one click, Liberty Nation delivers tomorrow's news.
And remember, liberty.
Today.
All the time and everywhere.
Liberty Nation connected the dots between a Chinese research biolab and a wet market where COVID-19 was supposedly discovered 2 months before the MSM.
1776!
We were first to alert you of a serious attack on gun rights in Virginia. LN honed in on the Biden-Burisma scandal months before it hit the papers. We brought you exclusive interviews from the border.
We're looking at people just rising up.
Liberty Nation was on the ground in London,
Trump rally in front of the American Embassy,
bringing you on-the-scene reports about Brexit. LN reported that COVID-19 was more virulent but less deadly weeks before others. LibertyNation.com delivers tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Liberty Nation Radio, the Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles and a new Roku channel. Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
When the junior senator from California, Kamala Harris, hit the skids and descended into free fall during her much-anticipated presidential run, the source of her failure was clear: her identity, or lack thereof. Who exactly is this newly minted running mate for Joe Biden? During the primary campaign, which ended shockingly early for her despite great expectations, one day she would present as the tough-on-crime Attorney General of California, locking up drug offenders and appealing to moderate voters. The next day, she would channel Bernie Sanders as a social justice warrior supporting Medicare for all, remember that? And the Green New Deal, still alive in the hearts of radicals everywhere. When presented with a tough issue, Kamala dodged and gave vague answers that left people wanting and wondering. Joining us to analyze who Kamala Harris really is and how her presence affects or changes the race for president is our old friend, LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer. Welcome back, sir.
Hello, Tim. Good to be here.
Well, always good to have you. So is Kamala, or Kamala, I'll probably go back and forth on the name since both seem to be acceptable. Is she an inspired choice, or the only real option for Joe Biden is a woman of color with significant experience in national politics who could step in at any time and assume the presidency without issue?
Well, I'll tell you why I think she's a bad choice, and I'm talking from Joe Biden's point of view, not from what I think of her personally. A couple of red flags that should have stepped out. She's very good. She's an opportunistic politician. She's good at getting attention focused her way. But then once she gets elevated, once she gets on that higher pedestal, she has a tendency to fizzle out. And I'll give you two examples. One, the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings, which were obviously, in her mind, set up to be a big moment for her, national attention. Here we go. She came off as bullying, inquisitional, kind of unfocused, trying to nail him down on this obscure, who are you talking to? You know, none of it really made a lot of sense. And she came across, and it was a big moment for her, and she just underperformed massively. Second moment, very similar, after being elevated to top tier status after the first debate in Miami in 2019, when she went after Joe Biden on busing. That made her a top tier candidate. So she got elevated to that new level. Okay, you're in the top tier. What did she do? Froze like a deer in the headlight. The next debates, everyone is saying, is she ill? Is she sick? Why isn't she saying anything? She was quiet. Basically, she had the renewed attention, and she didn't have a lot to say because, you know, when it really gets down to it, I don't think she has a lot to say.
The adjectives that come to mind in terms of her performance during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings would be, in my mind, snarky, mean, petty. She didn't come off well at all. And I say that, you know, without any political prejudice of one kind or another. But we discussed during the primary campaign, Joe, about Kamala's authoritarian instincts. What evidence is there of that?
Well, I thought the best example, I should have scared the heck out of the whole country, was when she said to Joe Biden so famously, I do not believe you are a racist, but that but just hanging like a juicy curveball that Ted Williams is going to hit like 500 feet. You know, it was just, you know, everyone. First of all, the idea that it's her call. You know, I do not believe you are a racist.
Oh, what a great relief that must have been to Joe Biden to have her declare him not a racist. Whew. Wow, that was close, huh?
If she can say that to Joe Biden, what is she going to say to the rest of us? You know, so I above all, what I see her as is just a classic. Even going back to the uniparty days politician, in that she's out for herself. She's career-minded. She comes from the Willie Brown political machine politics in California. And to me, she's always been about advancing her own career more than about any real ideals. And this is the Democratic Party that the progressives called the shots throughout the whole primary season. Then they panicked and went to establishment Joe Biden. And now they have Kamala as the president in waiting if Biden wins. And she doesn't have any ideals, really. When you think about it, she's just an ambitious swamp politician, even if she hasn't been there for 36, 40 years like Biden has.
So, Joe, you talk about how she doesn't seem to have any ideological moorings, but she's considered to be at the far left of the liberal part of the Democratic Party as opposed to the progressive radical left wing. But she has presented herself at times as being woke to the level of Bernie. Is she at the Bernie level, the Bernie Sanders level on the wokeness socialist scale?
I don't think she is on the authenticity scale to that degree. She's a senator from California, and you have to say certain things to get elected. And like I said, getting elected, advancing, moving up that ladder is the most important thing to her. Yes, she's a progressive. Yes, she's woke. But if it came a choice between moving up one more step on that ladder or making a truly principled ideological stance, I think a lot of Americans are going to see this from her as this campaign season goes on. She is not a profile in courage. I think she is more of a scheming politician, And that is going to come out over the next 3 months. And Joe Biden is not going to like that.
Do you think voters will pick up that selecting Kamala Harris represents a surrender by Joe Biden to the left wing of the party that demanded not just a woman, but a woman of color? Or will they see her as a natural choice in a time of upheaval and consciousness about racial justice in the land?
I hope and I think people are going to see her as the unimaginative choice that she is. She was the safe. I did a quick Google search on the 2 words, Kamala pragmatic, and you just get thousands of hits. Everyone's using that word pragmatic. Pragmatic choice by Biden. She's pragmatic. And it's just, how's the best way to put this? It was a safe, dull pick. And now for the second election in a row, you have a safe, I think, dull duo, an establishment duo, Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, and now Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. This is not going to inspire anybody. And the thing Democrats still don't understand about Donald Trump, whether you love him or you hate him, he inspires the people who support him. They will get out and vote for him. I am not convinced that Kamala Harris is going to bring anybody out and say, wow, I got to get out there and vote for Joe Biden.
Well, now voters, Joe, have an awful lot to deal with this year. A pandemic, a staggered economy, riots in the streets, a bombastic president, his opponent clearly in decline, and now a woman who failed badly in her own right, who appears more likely than any VP candidate in our lifetime to actually ascend to the presidency without being elected in her own right. Do you think voters will feel that voting for Biden is essentially and ultimately voting for Kamala Harris for president?
Yes, I strongly believe that. I actually just wrote an article about this. It just makes this whole process of this Democratic presidential nomination such just an amazing freak show. She was rejected by Democratic primary voters in 2019 when they ran the most stridently progressive platform. Every debate was dominated by these left-wing talking points. And then they just handed the car keys over to Joe Biden and said, here, you choose for us, be thinking he's not going to be there for 4 years. He's a placeholder, and whoever his vice president is going to be the real nominee. They, in effect, said, hey, Joe, go ahead and pick for us, which is saying, hey, Democratic establishment, pick our candidate for us. And now they have Kamala Harris, and I think it's going to be a real fizzle. I think it's going to be, there might be a quick bump. In 2 weeks from now, there's going to be a hangover, and it's like, how do we get excited about Kamala Harris as a president in waiting? I don't think you do. You do not get excited about her. If you are a progressive, any kind of Democrat, you're not excited about this.
Okay, so let me ask the money question, Joe. Does Kamala Harris ultimately help or hurt the Joe Biden ticket?
I actually think it's not going to matter much at all for the simple reason that he's a horrible candidate. I don't see how you would have given him a substantial boost with any of the other possible vice presidential candidates. Biden got this nomination because everyone else was found wanting. And then he had to go from that collection of rejects and pick a running mate.
Okay, Joe, we're closing in on 75, 80 days till the election, so you and I will be getting together with increasing frequency in the weeks ahead, and I look forward to it. Thanks for joining us as always.
So do I. Thank you.
Joe Schaeffer, LibertyNation.com. And we'll be back in a moment to discuss the audacious attempt to exterminate the nation's largest gun rights organization, the NRA.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it's that time again, the time to talk liberty with LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, our constitutional lawyer, and our resident guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza. Welcome back.
Hi,
Scott. Well, good to have you again. We rely on you in these times where liberty is so threatened. And let's talk about a story that we did a lot on last week. I want an update on the New York Attorney General Leticia James and her efforts to vaporize the National Rifle Association.
Well, we talked all about Leticia James saying that she's petitioning the New York courts to extinguish legally the NRA as a corporation, leaving it with no existence whatsoever, like murdering a human being. But what we didn't talk about, because I didn't know it at the time, is that Karl Racine, the D.C. Attorney General, also filed suit in D.C. where the NRA Foundation is chartered. Now, he didn't ask for the foundation to be extinguished, just hobbled as we lead into the election, and basically have all the funds and the decision-making be done by a board of overseers that's court-appointed.
What a coincidence. They filed, the District of Columbia, New York, filed against the NRA and the NRA Foundation on the same day. What are the chances of that, Scott?
It appears to be just that, Tim. These two Soros-aligned prosecutors who both pledged to go after the NRA and gun owners in their campaigns filed these suits the exact same day on the calendar, and there's just no evidence beyond that to suggest that there's any kind of collusion. I think there's a colorable case for the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into whether they colluded to deny the pro-gun speakers their right to free speech for the upcoming election.
Okay, more to come, but let's move on to Kamala Harris. Earlier in the show, we've discussed the political implications of her selection as a running mate of Joe Biden. We've talked about the race issue and how all of that plays out. But then there's the constitutional issue. Kamala Harris, does she pass constitutional muster? And if not, how come?
You know, Tim, I was going to say that she was the worst possible type of candidate, which is one who will throw constitutional rights under the bus at a blink of an eye in order to advance her short-term interests. But also, I think that's a wrong analysis, and the reason why is because she'd also buoy constitutional rights if they would advance her short-term interests. So yes. A true tyrant would only hurt the interests, even if the people were on the opposite side. So I think that she is somebody who will just do or say whatever gets her more power or office. When she thought that prosecuting marijuana users would benefit her electorally, she seems to have aggressively prosecuted marijuana users. Now that marijuana use is disfavored among her proposed constituency, she denigrates the prosecution of marijuana users and jokes about having used it in the past as well. The same can be said, Tim, for instance,
while listening to music that they went back and checked didn't even exist at the time she said she was toking up.
That's true. She also, Tim, rose to office in large part from attorney general to senator by basically prosecuting Backpage.com's publishers for publishing sexually explicit advertising. Now, the thing is, Tim, she knew that it was a violation of their free speech rights and the Communications Decency Act when she did it, and now she's in favor of legalizing sex work after, basically trying to put these people in prison. So I just think that we can expect from her whatever she thinks will benefit her electorally and politically, and that's really where we can sort of see the wind going with respect to our constitutional rights under that kind of direction.
I think what you're saying, and I agree with it completely, is that the fact that she appears to be so unprincipled is actually something of a safety net, because she's not going to come storming in like a Bernie Sanders would and throw everything aside based on some firm ideological position. All right, the New Jersey Supreme Court has deepened the split on an important thing, whether phone unlocking orders violate the Fifth Amendment.
Can the police make you unlock your phone so that they can inspect the contents? What we have in New Jersey, though, is the court saying that you do not have the Fifth Amendment right to keep from unlocking your phone. And sorry for the double negative there, but the court is saying if the cops ask you to unlock your phone, you got to unlock your phone. Now, they may not have a right to some of the contents of the phone, the court said. But for the unlocking itself, now that is
it's like the unlocking, though, is like 90% of the law. Like possession's 90% of the law. Once you unlock it and they get access to it, who knows where it goes
Right.
from there.
Well, I think we can expect him, and really we need to see the Supreme Court address this now that we have such a significant series of splits. It's all over the map here throughout the country. Some courts saying that you have the right to be protected from this kind of intrusion, and some courts saying that you have to let the police in. We need a national standard.
Now, if it goes to the Supreme Court, my prediction is that it's a 4-4 split, and John Roberts recuses himself because it's a difficult issue.
Just to make it hard for you to...
Yeah, exactly. The University of Southern Maine is asking students and faculty, are they asking or demanding, to sign a Black Lives Matter statement and anti-racism pledge. Asking or compelling, Scott?
Well, they're just asking, but they're going to be publishing the names of the people who sign. So if you don't sign, and it's Glenn Cummings is the name of the president of the University of Southern Maine. He was a Democrat member of the Maine House of Representatives, and he's the one who's doing this, that's subjecting this unconstitutional imposition on the students of this government college. Tim, this is not a private college, right? And let's recall that it's not about saying that you agree not to be racist, but supporting quote unquote anti-racism in this regard means all kinds of political, meaningful statements about who you would vote for, and a number of the other public policy statements. It's so blatantly unconstitutional, it's quite shocking, but that's just where we are, I suppose.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be on that list of people who are obviously racist if they don't sign this pledge. So it's a list of racists, right? One more story before we let you go. A Texas judge holds the first virtual jury trial in a criminal case. Will this set a precedent and open the floodgates for this to happen everywhere?
Well, this was a misdemeanor speeding case, I just want to say, and I think it may set a precedent, and certainly this is something that people are going to have to grapple with if we continue on this massive shutdown existence with the COVID response. There's a massive backup, Tim, of litigation because of the situation with public interaction. So getting through that may involve a lot of this kind of thing. For misdemeanors, it's one thing, Tim. For felonies, I think we'll have to see some significant legislation authorizing this unorthodox approach.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, with our own Mark Angelides. All of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying now more than ever, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.